All right, guys. Can you mute yourselves there? All right. All right. I think we had more people in the storm last week than this week. Okay. You can use the mouse. Okay, we got everybody in?
Yeah, everybody get it.
All right. So for those of you that weren't here last week, a little rain or something going on. I hope you're caught up with it. These are being posted usually like by tonight. They'll be on there. The latest will be tomorrow morning on this channel on YouTube. So live on Zoom tonight or tomorrow morning on YouTube, and of course live here. So does anybody got any questions on what we covered? Especially like last week, I got a few emails from people and text and with questions, good questions that they should ask here. So, because you know, everybody's probably more than one person probably got the same question. So. We're in. There is a solution.
Last week?
I think there was just as many or more last week.
13
right?
last week. It was 13. 13 or 14.
13? Really? I thought there was more than that.
We moved around a lot.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Yeah, there were a lot of people on Zoom last week, but that's okay. If you have a problem driving in bad weather, I understand. One of the questions that I got was, God, I didn't write it down, so I'm trying to remember. Oh, we were talking about the two powers and the one solution. Does that make sense to all you guys? Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
I can't remember who had a question. Somebody sent me a text. You guys send good texts and ask me good questions after the thing is over with. If you do that here, you know, somebody else probably has the same question in their head, so it's good. The more questions you give me, the more we'll learn here. You know, the more we'll discuss. So if you got a question, just raise your hand. If you got a question on Zoom, just cut me off, and I can't see your hand, so just jump in and cut me off. But questions are good. Well, I know somebody was kind of stuck on the two powers and the one solution, so let's just take a minute and talk about that again. Listen, we don't have to get this all done by next week. Somebody's trying to get in. It's more important that it makes sense to you before we move on. So they were talking about, what I said to you was there's two powers, and the power of God and the power of the fellowship. Okay, and again, if you missed last week, it's all on YouTube, so go look at it. You know, if you got a question and you don't ask it in here, pretty much if you go online and look at it again, somebody told me one time they got mad, they don't like watching this online, because I said, why? I said, it takes me 3 hours to watch an hour class. Keep pausing it, writing stuff down. So, but you'll probably find the answer if you go back and look it over again. But anyway, so two powers and one solution. Power of God, power of fellowship. Okay? The solution is the steps. And I talked about, there's some people that come into the rooms of recovery and they tap into the power of God and they stay sober for weeks, months, and years. Right? And some people come into recovery and they tap into the power of the fellowship. You know, they hook up with people hugging them, telling them to keep coming back, and you know, they got friends, and so they you know, they could stay sober for weeks, months, and years, right? And some people come into the rooms and they tap into the power of God and the power of the fellowship. And they're on fire. And they could stay sober for weeks, months, and years, okay? But those three people I just described, all of them, one thing in common that they don't have. None of them have taken the solution. And the solution, as we read it in the book, and the chapter there is a solution, we read that paragraph, and that paragraph is the first 7 steps. And I think this was the question, okay? That I said the process of recovery is the first 7 steps, okay? And I think that's where this person was stuck on that. Why do we have 12 steps if the process of recovery is the first 7 steps? And maybe I didn't explain it well enough, so we'll go over it again. Okay, when you're working on yourself, and you're working on an issue, whatever you're working the steps on, alcohol, drugs, gambling, shopping, sex, whatever you're working, the first step addresses the problem. The remaining steps are all about the solution and the program of action. Step 1 is the problem, step 2 is the solution, and 3 to 12 is the program of action. Okay? So the process does not change from 2 to 12. The only thing that changes is step 1. Step 1 is what we address the problem with. So if you're working the steps on gambling or shopping or whatever you're working the steps on, and you're not working a 4th step on that. You're not working a 4th step or a 5th step or a 6th step or a 7th step on that topic. You're doing the regular 4th step that the book tells us to do. And so the process is the same. But the first 7 steps are personal. They're about self. Okay? So it's an inward thing that we're doing. 1 through 7 is about me looking at me. When we get to 8, we start going outside of ourselves. Even on step 11. Okay? Because on 11, I'm looking to improve my relationship with a higher power. Okay? So I'm going outside of myself for that. But the process of recovery is the first 7 steps. And we took that out of, there's a solution. And I think it was on page 25. The first paragraph on page 25 is in italic there. It starts off with, there is a solution, right? And it covers the first 7 steps. So according to the book, the solution is the first 7 steps. The process of recovery is the first 7 steps. Yes, we have 5 more steps. What are they for? 8 is so I can make a list, and 9 is so I can go out and start clearing up the wreckage of my past. 10 is to do this 4 through 9 on a regular basis. 11 is to improve my relationship with God, and 12 is to carry the message and to practice these principles in all my affairs. Okay? So I hope that makes sense to you. If it doesn't, raise your hand, let's talk about it. Don't feel funny to raise your hand, because it's, I tell you, every week somebody grabs me after the class and, or on my way driving back to Norman, I get a text, you know. Let's talk about it, because that's what we're here for. Does anybody got any questions on that?
I do.
Yes.
Well, for me, it took through the 8th step, because I did not get what I needed. I didn't have God until I got to the 8th step. So it was an inward thing for me in the 8th step.
That makes perfect sense.
So, therefore, all the steps, you know, if we stop at 7, if they're, I don't want them to get the idea that 7 is it. Just like the 4th step is not it.
No.
So,
Yeah.
but for me, that was my only,
That's a good point, Susan. It makes a lot of sense too, because I want to talk about that for a minute. But in no way am I insinuating that we stop after 7. I'm
No.
not saying that at all. We have 12 steps. It's a 12-step program. It's not a 7-step program. There's a lot of work that has to be done 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. Okay, and that's all part of the program of recovery. Here's the fascinating thing. I've got so many friends in the rooms of recovery that have been sober for years, 20 years, 30, good AA members that, you know, they're in the book, they're in the literature, they're in meetings, they sponsor people, they're good members, right? And some of them, it had taken some years to fully concede to their innermost self that they were alcoholic. Okay? That's very common. Some people it's taken through the 8-step or more to complete the process of recovery and start working on other things. That's very common also. What I'm doing with you guys is we're tearing the book up and I'm showing you the process that if you're new, or if you can do like that set-aside prayer and put aside everything you think you know, and do the process this way, by the time you finish the first step, you don't have to wait 10 years or 8 years. You will be able to fully concede to your innermost self. By the time you finish the 7th step, you will have finished the process of recovery on whatever the problem is. You can't stop there, though, by no means. You have to keep going. Okay? But so many of my good friends that took them years to do this is because they did a little different way of the steps. It's not to say I'm right and they're wrong. I'm not making that statement. What I'm saying is, what I'm teaching here is each step, there's a result for each step, right? That you call them promises, I call them results. There's a result for each step. If you don't get that result, you need to take a look at what you didn't do or what you didn't get, okay? And so, when you're done with step 1, however long that takes you, you should be able to fully concede to your innermost self that you're alcoholic. Okay? When you're done with step 2, you should, without a doubt, have made a beginning of a relationship with a God that makes sense to you. Okay? And so, as you go through these, now, a lot of people, like a lot of my friends, that didn't do the process this way, and I'm not saying this is the right way, theirs is the wrong way. But a lot of people did it differently, and they didn't get the results until years later. Now, I've got friends 40 years sober, and he's a great AA member and great with the books and the steps. But it took him some years to really fully concede to his innermost self. It took him some years to get a relationship with God. When we get there, and I don't want to get ahead of myself, but when we get to step 3, you need to have a relationship with God. There's no way you can do the 3rd step without having a relationship with God. It is impossible. You can do what you think is the 3rd step. You can do what lots of people think, that they did a good 3rd step, but they have no relationship with God, because they didn't do the work in 2. That's why. And that's why it takes some people a long time to get that relationship with God in a good place. But there is a process and there is directions in 2 that will help you get there. And that's where you should be. Because there's no way, how can you possibly turn your will and your life over to the care of a God if you don't have any idea who and what God is to you, or no personal relationship with the God? How could you possibly turn your will and your life over? You can't. You cannot. You can think you can. You can think you did, but you really didn't, because you don't have that relationship. Now, as the years go by and you keep sticking around and doing this stuff, you wind up getting that. And you wind up having to have done that. What I'm saying to you is there's a process that each step you can do it. And you don't have to wait years to do it. That's what each step is designed for, to do that. And so we'll get there soon enough. All right. But that's a great point, Susan, and a lot of people have come to that process down the road when they could have come to it sooner. Okay. Anybody else got a question? All right, let's go back to the book then. I think, were we on page 23?
Bottom page
Except for
23.
25.
25?
So I have all that underlined.
23.
23, once in a while.
Once in a while, he may tell the truth.
Yeah.
Yeah, he usually got no idea why he takes this drink, right? It says, once this malady has a real hold, they are a baffled lot. There is the obsession that somehow, someday, they will beat the game, but they often suspect they are down for the count. You know, a good definition for the word obsession for us that works good is an obsession is a thought that excludes all other thought. An obsession is kind of like a horse at the racetrack, and he's going down the stretch. He's got his blinders on. The reason they put the blinders on is so the horse don't see the other horses and don't see the people in the stands. They don't want them distracted, right? If you ever been to the dog track, they chase that rabbit around, you know. So they don't want them distracted, okay? So an obsession is a thought that excludes all other thoughts. The blinders is what excludes everything else, and the horse only knows what's in front of him and he runs. And so for us, when we have an obsession, that's it. That will block out every other thought. And always, especially for new people, always the disease is going to win out. Insane thinking will beat sane thinking all the time if you're new, for sure. And the book even says that. Okay? So the insane thinking will always win out. So you can imagine what we're dealing with, right? We're dealing with the mind. And we just covered that last week, right? The main problem centers in his mind rather than his body. Okay. Let's go over to page 24. The top of the page says, at a certain point in the drinking of every alcoholic, so you're not an exception, every alcoholic, he passes into a state where the most powerful desire to stop drinking is of absolutely no avail. This tragic situation has already arrived in practically every case long before it's suspected. So that's telling me right there that I can't use my mind to overcome this, right? Stinking thinking doesn't take care of stinking thinking.
Danny, is that, in the room she'll hear a lot when I cross that invisible line. Is that pretty much this spot right here at 20 minutes?
The invisible line?
Or the line that
I don't know, I've never been able to see that damn invisible line. Yeah, probably, that's what they're talking about, you know, but don't forget, and I don't want to beat a dead horse, but don't forget that the book was written to raise the bottom, right? So most people that come into the rooms today are not yet real alcoholics, they're potential alcoholics. So that means most people really haven't crossed the line yet into, not everybody, but most, into full-blown alcoholism, right? Where they're starting to suffer from DTs, okay? So, yeah, but you know, the first week, I think it was, or the second week, we did that scale, where, what was your norm, remember that? Okay? That's pretty powerful if you think about that, because that norm, by the time we get here, we're all in the land of dysfunction. And by the way, I put something up today that'll really confuse me. I'm going to read it like 10 times myself. It says, only a few know how much one must know to know how little one knows. That doesn't mean anything about recovery, I don't know. Okay. So I can't use my mind to win. That's what this is telling me, okay? And now this whole stuff here is all italic, so this is an important paragraph, right? The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice in drink. So again, they're telling me that sane thinking is not as powerful as the disease. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. we're unable at certain times to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory of the suffering and humiliation of even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first dream. So, the suffering, I can't bring into mind all the consequences of what happened to me last week. As crazy as it may seem, but that's the truth. And that's what this is telling me. So this sane thinking is not going to win. The book talks about, later on we'll get to it, that sane thinking runs parallel with insane thinking, and the insane thinking always wins out. Right? Until you've been sober long enough and have these principles alive and well in you where you can change that. So then he talks about the almost certain consequences, like taking a beer or a glass of wine or something. They don't deter you. Okay? He says there's a complete failure of the kind of defense that keeps one from putting his hand on a hot stove. And we talked about that, right? We talked about, I think we used Vladimir, right? Did we use Vladimir? That when it comes to wood burning stoves, he ain't got a damn bit of sense. Right? That he's sane and normal in all areas of his life, but when it comes to alcohol and drugs, he don't have a damn bit of sense. The alcoholic may say to himself in the most casual way, "It won't burn me this time." Or perhaps he doesn't think at all. And then he winds up saying, "For God's sake, how did I ever get started again?" Only to have that thought supplanted by, "Well, I'll stop with the 6th drink," or "What's the use anyway," right? I don't know about you guys, but always when you read this, every paragraph practically, you need to find your own experience that matches this stuff. And for me, I can remember many times swearing I ain't going to do it, didn't want to do it, and I found myself doing it again, and then I'd say to myself, every time I'd say, "Oh, F it. I'm already here, I already started."
Start tomorrow.
Tomorrow. Tomorrow. I swear to God, I won't do this stuff no more. Tomorrow.
Monday.
No, Monday.
Yeah, well, that depends. Yeah.
Next Monday.
January 1st.
Tomorrow only counts. Tomorrow only counts if you went to bed. If you stay up for 3 days, it's still the same day, right? It's not yet tomorrow. So, when this sort of thinking is fully established in an individual with alcoholic tendencies, he has probably placed himself beyond human aid, and unless locked up, may go permanently insane, die or go permanently insane. So he's put himself beyond human aid. So everybody you meet in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous is human. Everybody that you meet in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous is human. And you have placed yourself beyond human aid. Now you need humans to help you. But this is leading us to that what we have to tap into is a power greater than ourselves. We have to tap into a God. Okay? So at the end, when we get to the end of step 1, it's not a pleasant thing. Nobody does a really good first step and feels great. Because a really good first step puts you in a funky kind of mood. Shit. Look what I've done to myself. Look at my life. Which is what step 2 is for. Because step 2 is a promise of hope. Okay? So, this is the one you got to go through a lot of uncomfortable feelings and stuff. This is why, as we go through this, you can see why there's so much more to this step than admitting that we're alcoholic, that we have a problem with alcohol and our lives are unmanageable. There's a lot of work that has to be done here. All right, page 25. So we went through the first paragraph where there is a solution. And now on the next second paragraph says, "The great fact is just this and nothing less. That we have had deep and effective spiritual experiences which have revolutionized our whole attitude toward life, toward our fellows, and toward God's universe. Remember on the circle we did, God, self, and others? Remember that? That's what we're talking about here, right? God, self, and others. So we have a common solution. But here's an interesting thing here. This paragraph, what I just read, has the word experience plural. Plural. Ever notice that?
Oh, yeah.
Deep and effective spiritual experiences, plural. Why do you think they have it plural?
And multiple.
Because like when I look back, it just seems like it's this little, I don't know, I mean, I didn't have that aha moment or anything, but it's like when I look back, it's like, you know, gradually, I just grow, you know, more and more.
Okay.
Educational variety.
If you notice, go ahead.
So, I think it's because I had somebody tell me one time to read what's that called in the back, the appendix or whatever. No,
Yeah, the appendix.
Yeah. And it's because not everybody has like the burning bush aha moment, and like some people have multiple in that. Does that make sense? Like it makes more,
Yeah,
like the educational variety or whatever it says. Is that what?
yeah, no, but because look what he's saying. He said that they have had deep and effective spiritual experiences, right? So it doesn't matter if you had, what the appendix says, because this is saying that you. And notice that this comes right after the process of recovery, the first 7 steps. That you should have had a deep and effective spiritual experience. Okay? But this is the thing. I don't know if you've ever heard my story, but when I tell my story, I share something that happened to me 2 years sober, that I had a deep and effective spiritual experience at 2 years sober, that looking back on that today, I can say I probably didn't need to go to a meeting for another year. I probably didn't need to meet with my sponsor. I probably didn't need to pick the book up. I probably didn't need to hit my knees and talk to God. I probably didn't need to sponsor anybody. I probably didn't need to do any of that shit, because I had a deep and effective spiritual experience. It was overwhelming. So it was about as powerful as I've ever gotten, okay? But as powerful as it was not powerful enough to keep me sober. I'm 30 years sober. To keep me sober all these years. I've had some other ones since then that were not as powerful, but they were pretty good. And that's why it's plural, because we need to have more than one. We need to keep having them. Every time I work the steps, I should have a deep and effective spiritual experience. At the very least, as what it relates to as what I'm working the steps on. I should see some progress and some spiritual growth in the area that I just worked the steps on. Does that make sense to you? So if you're gonna have a deep and effective spiritual experience and think it's gonna keep you sober for 30 years, it's not. And anybody that's got long-term sobriety in here will tell you that they've had these things over the years, now and again. And if you want to have them on a regular basis, then practice this stuff on a regular basis. And each time you go through these steps, you should have a deep and effective spiritual experience. Does that make sense to you guys? Okay. So he says, the central fact of our lives today is the absolute certainty that our Creator has entered into our hearts and lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. So right here, not for the first time and not for the last time, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous is letting you know that you can be a miracle. It's promising you a miracle.
Absolute certainty is quite a promise.
Absolute certainty. That is quite a promise. That God has entered into our hearts and our lives in a way which is indeed miraculous. If God has entered into your heart and mind and life in a way that's indeed miraculous, then you are, by definition, a miracle. And if you take the time to acknowledge that and feel that and keep doing what you're doing, then you'll stop demeaning yourself. One of the things I write up on the board sometimes, one of them says, I don't remember what it says. It just went in and out of my head, but I can't remember it. I'll put it up on the board. I'll look for it and put it up on the board next week. But it talks about knowing your worth. Why you accepting pennies for your worth so much, something like that. Go ahead.
Eric, something's kind of, I think I've had spiritual experiences, but what equates a spiritual experience? I mean, is it, getting your family back, not going to jail? I mean, how does one determine, I've received a spiritual experience?
Well, every time I did not go to jail, it was a spiritual experience. Without a doubt. You have to determine that for yourself.
The power
You
of
know,
God is
getting your
present.
family back, listen, we're people in here, we get in here and we're broken. We're not whole. And recovery is about becoming whole and wholeness, right? And putting yourself back together again. I always talk about Humpty Dumpty, right? And that's how we are. Like, and on Humpty Dumpty, all the king's horses and all the king's men can't put your sick ass back together again. But we can, because we have a way out that really works. Okay? And when you put yourself back together again, and something clicks for you, if you look at it with the right eyes, it's a spiritual experience. Okay? So, your family back together again, that's a damn spiritual experience. I'm very fortunate. I've always had a relationship with my kids, and we were never, that we didn't talk or anything like that. But there was a lot of other people in my life that, didn't really want anything to do with me. And, I say it all the time. When I got sober, 100 people around me got well. And so the amazing thing is that today I could look at just about anything as an experience in the spiritual nature. But I have to be able to accept it and understand it and feel it and understand why. I don't even have to understand why, but I just have to know that I'm on the right beam and I'm doing the right things. You don't grow spiritually when you're doing negative stuff. It's impossible to grow spiritually if you're practicing negative stuff. So if you're practicing good, positive things, your life's going to change. Things are going to start clicking for you. Things are going to start happening for you. And if you look at that as an experience of a spiritual nature, then it is. So he says, if you're as seriously alcoholic as we were, we believe there's no middle-of-the-road solution. We're in a position where life was becoming impossible, and if we had to pass into the region from which there was no return through human aid, we had but two alternatives. One was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we could, and the other to accept spiritual help. So, let's look at that paragraph there. First he's saying there's no middle-of-the-road solution. So, how many times have you heard in a meeting somebody say, I'm sitting on the fence? I'm not sure, you know. I'm not even sure if I'm alcoholic. I got some important news flash for you. Normal people never sit around wondering if they're alcoholic. Never. Doesn't matter how much they drank the night before, what trouble they got into. They never think about it because they know they aren't. If you'll be sitting around wondering if you're alcoholic, you probably are. There's no middle of the road solution. You're not half pregnant. Right? It's impossible. You can't be half pregnant, right? Well, you're not half sober either. You're either sober and you're doing this deal, or you're stuck in the sickness and that the disease is doing you and you haven't realized it yet. There's no middle of the road solution. They're sober and everything else is what we call not sober. Is that spiritual? All right. Then he says, that there's two alternatives. Now listen to these two alternatives. Try to listen to these two alternatives. I'm going to read them again. If it's possible, try to think of this as like you're normal. You're not an alcoholic. Now, if it's possible for you to think like a normal person for a minute, look at this. One was to go on, thank you. One was to go on to the bitter end, blotting out the consciences of our intolerable situation as best we could, and the other is to accept spiritual help. Now, if you were normal and you just read that, what would your answer be? Accept spiritual help. Very good, you're normal. You don't need to be here, get out. A normal person, this is kind of like that in Bill's story. Remember when you read that paragraph, that Bill? A normal person was like, God, that guy's sick. And Bill thought, nevertheless, I still thought I could control the situation. A normal person would say, blotting out the consciousness of our intolerable situation as best we could. I did that shit every day for years. Right? For years. Blotted out the consciousness of my intolerable situation as best I could every day. It's a no-brainer. The other choice is spiritual help. I think I'll blot out the consciousness of my intolerable situation. All right? That's how sick we are. Now you may say, I want spiritual help, but you're continuing to do everything you've been doing. You haven't changed anything. And you're thinking that you're not blotting out the consciousness of your intolerable situation, but you are. Interesting stuff, right? All right, let's go over to the next page, 26. So this is talking about Roland, and he's talking about Roland going to see Dr. Young, and he spent time with Dr. Young. This is kind of interesting. I forgot how much time he spent with him. Does it say it in here? He spent a couple of months.
A year.
A year? Okay.
He went years.
He spent some time with Dr. Young, and he got sober. And he was in good spirits and in good health and on the right path. And he went to come back to America. And in those days they took the ships, you know. And so I think he stopped, if I'm not mistaken, in Paris. And then from Paris they were going to go to New York. But when he stopped in Paris, he was, you know, wealthy, and he had friends, you know, wealthy friends all over the place. When he stopped in Paris, he went with some friends, and he got drunk. And he spent all this time dying with Dr. Young, and now he got drunk again. So he goes back to the doctor, he says here, so he returned to this doctor whom he admired and asked him point blank why he could not recover. He wished above all things to regain self-control. There's your answer there. That's why he couldn't recover. He wanted to control his drinking. Remember the guy who surrenders, the prisoner, and he's walking, remember that one?
Yeah.
He's walking to the prison camp, and he's like, I'm your prisoner, but I gotta have my girlfriend. You know, I'm your prisoner, but I need my own car. You know, I'm your prisoner, but remember I told you, any condition you have upon your sobriety, you have no sobriety at all. All you have is that condition thereof. And so, he wished above all things to regain self-control. He seemed quite rational and well-balanced with respect to other problems, yet he had no control whatever over alcohol. So there it is. I mean, that's your answer right there. He wanted to control his drinking. You want to have control over it instead of giving up and surrendering. So the bottom of the page says, this man still lives and is a free man. He doesn't need a bodyguard, nor is he confined. He can go anywhere on this earth where other free men may go without disaster, provided he remains willing to maintain a certain simple attitude. Don't yell out the answer, people. Well, what do you think a certain simple attitude might be? What do you guys over there, anyone take a guess? What do you think the certain simple attitude might be?
That we can't control it,
Huh?
that we can't control it.
Well, we already said that. Now, you
Don't
can't
take the
control
first
it.
drink.
Huh?
Don't take the first drink.
Don't take the first drink. That's not such a simple attitude. In fact, that could be a very difficult attitude. Because, in fact, if I have that attitude that I'm not going to take the first drink, I'm trying to control my drinking, aren't I?
It's that we're powerless over it if we do it.
We're powerless over it. Certain simple attitude. Here it is. Simple, recovery first. I'm going to practice recovery. I'm going to do all the things this book that I've been studying is telling me to do. I'm going to do these things that my sponsor's telling me to do. I'm going to do the things that I heard in the meeting. I'm going to practice recovery first. Before I take a drink. Before I take a drug. There's three things that help you. I don't care how long you've been sober. If you try these three things, 99.9% of the time you're going to make the right decision. And they work on everything. If you're new, they work just as good as if you're 30 years sober and you got an issue that you're working on. These three things, write this down. This is a good tool to have. Before you do anything, talk about it, write about it, and pray about it. Okay. Don't forget, alcohol screws my body, alcoholism screws my mind. Can't drink because of my body, can't stay sober because of my mind.
Think about it, talk about it, write about it.
Think about it, talk about it, write about it.
No.
Pray about it.
Right.
Pray about it.
Write about it, talk about it, pray about it.
Don't think about it.
That's your problem, you're thinking about it. Talk about it, write about it, pray about it.
Thank you.
So get somebody else that's sober and talk to them about what's going on in your head. Get on your knees and talk to God for a minute. Take a piece of paper and write good and bad on one side. And, you know, if I do this, this is what's going to happen. That's good, and this is what's going to happen. That's bad. If you talk about it, write about it, pray about it, 99.9% of the time you will make the right decision.
Write about it.
Talk about it.
Write about it.
Talking about it.
You know they've got those signs. Do they have one in here? Yeah, there you go. Where's that? Oh, there. On New York, they used to have that first one on the left. They used to have it upside down.
Yeah.
And I remember saying, I was just a couple of weeks sober. No, a couple of months sober. I remember saying one time, why is that upside down? Just think. And I said, man, you see that, Danny? I said, yeah. He said, that's for us, not for you. Think. Talk about it, write about it, pray about it. You're going to be so much further ahead than if you don't do that. It's amazing. me give you a couple of questions to ask yourself or to ask a newcomer. This is not out of the book, but what am I really giving up? Whatever you're working the steps on, alcohol, drugs, or any other issue, ask yourself, what am I really giving up? And then what significant event brought you to seek help? How many times did similar things happen? How many times did we reach the end of our rope and pretend it wasn't really it? How are you comfortable when you always have to prove something? Why did it ever seem to you like that enough was enough? I don't know about you guys, but for me, you could have just took the word enough out and put in more, right? Enough was never enough of anything. I never was able to get enough love, enough sex, enough money, enough alcohol, enough praise, enough attention. I always needed more.
Will you repeat them, those questions?
What am I really giving up? What significant event brought you to seek help? How many times did similar things happen? How many times did we reach the end of the road and pretend it really wasn't? How are you comfortable when you always have to prove something? Why didn't it seem that enough was never enough? So I know hundreds of people that want to be sober. If they just didn't have to stop drinking. How addicted we are to what we really want is an amazing thing. So this process, I have to learn it, I have to learn how to do it, and I have to learn how to do it in all my affairs. Okay. Okay, we're back in the book on 27. Let's skip down to the paragraph that says, yes, replied the doctor. But Roland's asking him, is there no exception? And he said, yes, there is. Exceptions to cases such as yours have been occurring since early times. Here and there, once in a while, alcoholics have had what are called vital spiritual experiences. To me, these occurrences are phenomena. What does that mean?
Something he doesn't understand, or like magic.
Something different, right? This whole paragraph and what we're talking about in recovery is all about change. Okay? So a phenomenon is change, isn't it? It's something different. They appear to be in the nature of huge emotional displacements, change, and rearrangements, more change. Ideas, emotions, and attitudes, which were once the guiding forces of the lives of these men, are suddenly cast to one side, more change. And a completely new set of conceptions and motives begin to dominate them, more change. In fact, I have been trying to produce some such emotional rearrangements within you, more change.
Danny,
Yes.
What page it is in this book?
It's the same one as this book, 27.
It's on 27?
Yeah.
Next one too?
Yeah, I know all of them. You see it, it's the paragraph that starts with, "Yes," replied the doctor. About the middle of the page.
Yes,
Got it?
yeah.
All right. So what he's talking about, everything he's saying is change. We have to produce some change, right? If you don't change, then everything's going to be the way it always is. And again, we come in, we drag ourselves in, come into these rooms. Every year I keep thinking I'm getting a book. Falling apart. And we come into these rooms and because we want to change, and we don't do the thing. It's the craziest thing, right? Somebody that comes into recovery, into AA, and doesn't work steps, it's like a guy that buys a new suit and goes home and don't take a shower, he puts the suit on. He may look good, but he still stinks. He's still dirty, right? It's like plowing your field and not planting nothing in it. It don't make any sense. Why would you do all that and not plant nothing? So, if you come into recovery, why not get busy and change your life? Because that's what it's about, change. I heard a guy one time give a description of, he said, here's the type of people we are. We go to this really nice restaurant that's got a smorgasbord of lobster and crab and filet mignon and all the finest foods you could think of, and all the way at the end is a little bowl of cheese and crackers, and you're over there with the cheese and crackers. Right? Because we're used to pecking with the buzzards. If you want to know what it is to fly and soar like an eagle, stick around and do this work and your life is going to change. If you're okay with pecking with the buzzards, keep doing what you're doing. Okay. I don't know if I lost a couple of pages of this on the floor, but. So, on the bottom of page 28, he talks about, in the following chapter, there appears to be an explanation of alcoholism. So the chapter, more about alcoholism, is what?
More about alcoholism.
It's an explanation of alcoholism. If you want to know what alcoholism is, there's a whole chapter that explains it, as we understand it, and then a chapter addressed to the agnostic. Many who were once in this class are now among our members. Surprisingly enough, we find such convictions no great obstacle to a spiritual experience. Further on, clear-cut directions are given showing how we have recovered. These are followed by 43 personal experiences. Each individual in the personal stories describes in his own language and from his own point of view the way he established his relationship with God. So what is this then? All the stories in the back of the book are about step 2. And I think we passed it. I think in the doctor's opinion, it tells us to read the book through and through, doesn't it? Yeah, at the end of the doctor's opinion. I earnestly advise every alcoholic to read this book through and through. To read this book through, and though perhaps he came to scoff, he may remain to pray. So, all you hear in the rooms is the first 164 pages. I don't know why. There's nowhere in this book it tells us to read the first 164 pages. It does tell us to read the whole book. And here on page 29, he's saying that these personal stories are all how people, from their own point of view, the way he establishes relationship with God. It's the second step. We hope no one will consider these self-revealing accounts in bad taste. Our hope is that many alcoholic men and women desperately in need will see these pages and believe that it is only by fully disclosing ourselves and our problems that they will be persuaded to say, yes, I'm one of them too. I must have this thing. So, the intention of this book is to help you change your life and get in touch with a pile of greater yourself that's going to solve your problems. Okay? We're going to find out in a little bit that alcohol is not really your problem. It's just a symptom of the problem. The steps do not address symptoms. Chew on that one for a minute. The steps do not address symptoms. The steps address the problem. Okay? If you address the problem and rectify the problem, guess what? There's no symptoms. The symptoms are gone. If there's no problem, the symptoms are gone. And yet we run around the rooms trying to worry about alcohol, drugs and drugs and drugs. And that's not the problem. It's only a symptom of the problem. If you get busy doing this work, you address who and what you really are and what the problem really is. And that symptom will not be there anymore. How about that? All right, we got a couple minutes left. I don't want to get into more about alcoholism until next week. So, anybody got any questions? Anybody got any questions at all? Nobody got any questions? Yes.
I got a question. Dan's got a question.
Okay.
Back on page 25, in that first paragraph, there is a solution.
Uh-huh.
A couple of weeks ago, or a week ago, you wrote down the steps.
Yes.
Could you do that again? Please?
Yeah, let me find page 25. I got it here somewhere. There it is. There is a solution. Almost none of us like the self-searching, the leveling of our pride, step 4. The confession, step 5. Of shortcomings, 6 and 7. Which the process requires for a successful consummation. But we saw that it really worked in others, step 2. And we had come to believe in the hopelessness and futility of life as we had been living it, step 1. The rest of this paragraph, step 3.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else got a question? Did you have a question?
I did.
Okay.
On the questions that you had, what was the third one and the fifth one?
What?
What am I really giving up? What significant event brought you to get help? How many times did we reach the end of the rope and pretend it wasn't there? I need the other two questions. I can get them from the list too.
There you go.
I have them somewhere, but I couldn't find them.
Anybody else got a question I can answer?
I did those, didn't I?
No?
Yeah.
Huh?
No, I was talking to you.
Okay. All right. Well, same time, same channel next week then. Thank you.
So,